Long-term marriages are complex biological systems, and just like any system under sustained, invisible tension, they can fray. Marriage after 50 introduces a sudden shift in the environment. Careers end. Children leave home. The daily mechanics of child-rearing and providing that held the household together for decades vanish, leaving two aging adults searching for renewed identity and purpose. From an evolutionary standpoint, long-term pair bonds do not survive on mere momentum. They require continuous, active signals of mutual investment to remain intact. More specifically, they require the exclusivity of emotional allegiance. The system relies on both partners treating each other as the primary source of trust, disclosure, and life guidance. Introduce a high-authority third party into this closed loop, specifically a charismatic external spiritual guru, and the dynamic changes. When an external authority begins intercepting the trust and guidance seeking that historically belonged to the spouse, the marital system experiences immediate friction. The bond weakens entirely independent of any physical infidelity. To map this friction, Dr. Sudyendra S.G. conducted a structured interview study focusing on approximately 100 Orthodox couples over the age of 50. The data revealed a recurring pattern across these households, a phenomenon defined as emotional displacement. This involves a wholesale transfer of authority. Trust and life guidance move entirely away from the spouse and toward the spiritual figure. Standard clinical assumptions often frame this marital breakdown as the result of a manipulative guru preying on a disloyal spouse. The evidence does not support that conclusion. This specific form of marital divergence is a predictable outcome. It happens when baseline human psychology interacts with an unregulated institutional structure. To prevent this collapse, we have to stop passing moral judgment on individual devotees and start viewing religious participation through the rigorous lens of behavioral genetics and institutional design. Let's map the flow of emotional allegiance across these households using a three-point network graph: husband, wife, and guru. Watch the connection weights. 72% of wives report active influence from an external guru. 64% of wives rate that guru as more trustworthy than their husband in family matters, and 83% prefer the guru as their primary life guide, viewing their husband as insufficiently wise. Consequently, only 23% of wives continue to support a husband who distances himself from their chosen spiritual institution. On the other side of the triad, 71% of husbands report an unwillingness to adopt the wife's guru as their own. This leaves 64% of these husbands experiencing substantial old age loneliness and isolation. The data maps this explicitly. The wife's allegiance moves outward, while the husband's companionship collapses inward. In these households, spiritual practice does not supplement the marital bond. It quantitatively replaces it. Family researchers classify the condition of these isolated spouses as ambiguous marital loss. This abstract model illustrates a difference between sympathy-based care and empathy-based care. The husband continues to receive food, medicine, and physical company. Biological necessities flow in, but emotional investment, the recognition of the spouse as a full person, is blocked at the door. Starved of empathy-based care at home, that 64% of isolated husbands are forced to rely on shallow, informal networks, park friends, walking companions, or shared news-watching, just to secure basic human connection. A husband can remain entirely present in the physical space of the home, perfectly masking a total emotional withdrawal from the marriage. To understand how this happens, we have to look at the mechanics driving the data. This is a causal loop known as the reciprocal escalation cycle. It starts here. The aging husband senses a loss of intellectual authority and physical relevance. Feeling perceived inferiority, he attempts to rigidly reassert control over his environment. The wife, seeking autonomy after decades of serving the family, experiences this response as controlling. She withdraws and seeks emotional validation outside the home. This is the critical failure point. An unsupervised spiritual authority hears only her side of the story and validates her grievances. Armed with external validation, she returns home. The husband feels replaced and becomes highly defensive. His defensiveness then perfectly confirms the guru's negative assessment of him. The external guru rarely creates the initial marital tension. Instead, they act as a highly reactive accelerant inside a system that is already unstable. Without a structural change to the institution, unchecked one-on-one counseling creates a feedback loop that consistently drives the partners further apart. This cycle explains the mechanics of the collapse, but it doesn't explain why some individuals are more susceptible to the loop than others. Twin and family studies show that traits like religiosity, interpersonal trust, and attachment security are not just personal choices. They have a measurable heritable component. This means that a spouse's response to a charismatic figure is a biological interaction. Their underlying genetic disposition meets an environmental structure, the spiritual institution, that either exploits or protects that disposition. Because these traits are biologically distributed across human populations, any large spiritual institution will inevitably encounter devotees wired for high levels of trust and external guidance seeking. We cannot change baseline human genetics, and we cannot erase a couple's relationship history. Therefore, we have to redesign the architecture of the spiritual institutions themselves to mitigate these inherent vulnerabilities. The solution derived from the research is direct. Spiritual organizations must institute mandatory structural friction. The primary reform is mandatory joint participation. Teachings regarding marital duties, family separation, or detachment must involve a structural barrier forcing both spouses to be present. This requires strict limits on unsupervised, exclusive one-on-one contact. The communication must become balanced and bidirectional. Requiring both partners in the room neutralizes the feedback loop. It prevents unilateral judgments and enforces two-sided accountability. This structural friction does not suppress spiritual growth. It stops emotional displacement before it can gain destructive momentum. There is a mandatory caveat to joint participation. Organizations must conduct private danger screening first. Joint participation protocols are strictly excluded in cases involving domestic violence, coercive control, abuse, or self-harm risks. When those extremes are identified, spiritual advisors must step back entirely and refer the individuals to qualified clinical psychologists or family therapists. Spiritual practice in later life should function as a bridge toward honest communication and humility. It should not be used as a wedge to fracture the home. Unregulated devotion must not be allowed to act as an unchecked alternative relationship, quietly replacing a 50-year marital bond.